It's always an honor and a privilege to be able to stand behind this pulpit and be able to stand in the same place as such a great man of God that preaches such a phenomenal message. And he's right. I do have a bit of an old-fashioned message that I want to share, but something that truly never goes out of style. The title is "The Slain Lamb is the Risen Lion." In John chapter 1, verse 29, it says, "The next day John seeth Jesus coming unto him, and saith, Behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." Now, if you spent any time at all researching what crucifixion does to a human body, you would know that it's no great revelation to be told that Jesus suffered. But even if you have looked it up, the answer you came away with was that he suffocated and had to raise himself up and down just to get air into his lungs. I'm going to detail today what Jesus went through so that people like me, the broken, the battered, the abused, the abandoned, could stand here and enjoy such a beautiful church. I never want to be considered one of those Christians that make light of what grace actually costs. I've heard many men and women of God sing and cry out in prayer and thanksgiving of the grace of our King that surrounds us. Because the word says, where sin doth abound, grace doth much more abound. And many of us that get up to this altar and jump and shout and fall to our faces before our King, we know what grace is. We know what it's like to come so close to the edge of the world and for God's mighty hand that is never short unto salvation reach out to us. Just as we were about to take our final step off of this cliff into the darkness of this world, we know what it's like to be saved from ourselves. But the jumping and the shouting at this altar cannot take place without there first being a Calvary and a cross. We hear that Jesus was beaten. We hear that he was whipped 39 times and he bore the stripes so that we may be healed. But Jesus went through so much more than just being whipped. He was punched repeatedly. His beard was grabbed and ripped from his face. He was spit on. He was mocked and ridiculed as he carried that cross from Pilate's house of Golgotha. The weight of that cross couldn't have been more than 50 pounds. And this man, who was a carpenter and was no stranger to hard work, could not carry it by himself. He had been ripped to shreds by the cat of nine tails, and he had been hit so many times that he probably struggled to remain conscious. And as Jesus carried this cross through the city, he had every opportunity to stop the pain. He had every opportunity to call down legions upon legions of angels to descend and put an end to this torture that he was being unjustly forced to endure. But he continued on. And he had help, but that help was only a slight reprieve as he came closer and closer to his destination. And at Golgotha, he laid down that cross, and with almost no strength left in his body, covered with lashes and blood, he was forced onto that cross. And one by one, the guards took these nails that were bigger than anything you'd ever see in this modern day, and they started hammering them into this righteous man's body. And with every single strike that he took, he screamed. Not just the kind of scream when we stub our toes. No, Jesus screamed in agony, with every desire in his flesh to make this stop. Yet he kept going. And the guards kept at him. One nail in his left hand, pounded and pounded. One nail in his right hand, pounded and pounded. One nail driven through both of his feet, pinned him to this cross. Now, most medical professionals would say that it's almost impossible to do that without breaking a bone. But they managed to miss every metatarsal bone in his feet and his hands as they drove that spike into the wood of the cross. And this is where the guards messed up. They set that cross up And they started to push him up, and they raised him high for all to see. And Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And that is where the drawing of all men began. Jesus cried out in agony for 6 hours as he hung there, crucified for me. And to say this may seem ludicrous, but 6 hours for a crucifixion is a very short amount of time. Some men in that day lasted more than 24 hours before finally giving up the ghost. But don't let that convince you that those 6 hours weren't enough. The rotator cuffs, the ligaments, everything that you can possibly tear in a human body was torn. His lungs started to collapse as he slid down that cross and struggled to breathe. And when the shortness of breath became too much for him, he slid back up on that cross, putting all the weight on his feet just to catch some air. And now this may seem a little disgusting to you, but I'm not here to make Calvary pretty. Jesus vomited on his chest. Jesus soiled himself all over his legs. Whatever fluids the human body could release were released on that cross. And he was bruised. He was battered and torn to shreds. He looked into this moment and saw the countless souls that would be saved through this ministry. And when he had every chance to end the suffering, instead he endured. And when he gave up the ghost, he said, it is finished. So the next time the devil wants to tell you that you can't overcome, remind him that it is finished. The next time your past comes knocking at your door, tell him, my Jesus said it is finished. Hallelujah. My sin is the reason that Jesus hung on that cross for 6 miserable hours. My sin is the reason that he was ripped apart with the cat of 9 tails and punched and spit on and mocked. My sin and my filth is the reason that my father was brutally murdered. He died to save me. He died to deliver me. He died to show love to me. And guess what? He died for all of you too. Because Jesus loves you. Each and every one of you that struggle with loving yourself, there is a God that loves you above anyone else. Yes. There is a God that carried that cross from city to city and hung there for hours. It was crucified for us, for you individually. Jesus was in that day the slain lamb, but today he is the risen lion. And if we lay with that lamb, we will roar with the lion. Yes! Right now, I'm calling every one of you that God has forgiven. I'm calling every one of you that is unashamed of weeping for the King. Every one of you that is unashamed of looking like a fool. Stand to your feet and give this King some praise. Because you got to excuse me for a second while I do that. He died for me. He died for you. He loves you. Put the picture up. I'm up here because he was up there. I'm up here because he was up there. I'm up here because I put him up there. I did. For every time I thought being immoral, lying, stealing, robbing was more important than being a good Christian, than thanking this God that did that for me. I have no right to be up here. This is not my right to be up here. But God did that so that I could have a chance at living. That I could have a chance of walking into those pearly gates over yonder. That I could have a chance. I'm up here because he saw my sin, my filth. But he also saw my potential. And he said, I choose him. And He chose you. And He chose you. And He chose you. And He chose everyone in this building to be here at this appointed time. So understand something, saints, please. When you see us run, jump, shout, we do not apologize for our praise. Because Jesus didn't ask us to apologize for that.
Nice. That's good. That's good.